Ken served him twice. The first transaction took place around 4:30 in the afternoon. 2 rum and cokes. Brian Hooker paid with plastic spoke sparingly and retreated toward his wife at the pool. The bar was packed that Saturday. Ken moved quickly to the next customer in line. The second time was nearly 90 minutes later. Brian returned for more drinks as the bar grew even more crowded. People were everywhere. It was one of those Saturday nights at a beach bar, where fast service is the only way to survive. Brian acted accordingly. He looked at Ken and made a comment the bartender later relayed to the New York Post. He seemed relieved. He offered sincere thanks for the quick service provided by the staff. He mentioned how crowded it was. Ken nodded, poured the drinks, and moved to the next person in line. That was the final documented interaction with Brian before Lynette entered the water, never to be seen alive again. Ken is 38 years old and a native of the Bahamas. He has spent his entire life navigating the waters of Elbow Cay and the Sea of Abaco. Ken knows the geography of these islands as well as you and I know our own childhood neighborhoods. He understands the distances and exactly how the sea behaves under those specific atmospheric conditions. He knows how long a boat takes to cross between points after watching that route hundreds of times. When Ken heard Brian's account of what happened hours after he had served him, those final cocktails, his deep understanding of the local geography, forced him to stop and reflect. Let's examine Lynette Hooker's profile. She was 55, and from Onstead, a Michigan town, 70 miles from Detroit. She built a normal life there, before she and Brian sold everything to head out to sea. She wasn't a novice sailor who started in retirement. She grew up around boats and lakes as a child. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, confirmed to the press that Lynette was surrounded by lakes, boats, and swimming her entire existence. Her daughter, Carly Ellsworth, told the media her mother had always been an athletic and vigorous woman. She was an excellent swimmer. She couldn't have just fallen overboard like that. For over 10 years, the couple documented their life at sea as the sailing hookers. They watched turtles and sunsets while baking cinnamon rolls on the deck of their 55-foot sailboat named Soulmate. They were voluntary castaways who chose the ocean above everything else. Their last social media post was April 4, 2026, stating they wouldn't be moving from there. She had no idea. On the afternoon of April 4th, the hookers arrived at the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay. Ken was behind the bar and served them on 2 separate occasions. He never saw Lynette during those 2.5 hours. She was swimming when Brian ordered the drinks. Brian returned 90 minutes later to grab the second round of cocktails. The evening proceeded normally until Ken finished his shift and headed home. When he woke up to news of the night's events, Ken immediately knew something in the story didn't add up. You and I will dig deeper. Before we proceed, ensure your notifications are on so you miss nothing. We examine documented evidence citing every source. We don't speculate beyond what the official public record confirms. Join me to discover what Ken knows what Jim Todd saw and what that 6:34 photo reveals. Regarding the night Lynette vanished, a critical image exists. Joe, a fisherman at the Abaco Inn that afternoon, was taking landscape photos to send to his mother. He had no connection to the hookers and no reason to track their movements. He was simply capturing the waves, the atmosphere, and the beauty of a Bahamian sunset. Without realizing it, he captured something unsettling in the background of one of his frames. The photo, timestamped at 6:34, shows Brian and Lynette in the hotel pool. Lynette is wearing a light green swim cover-up, as confirmed by several investigative journalists after reviewing the evidence. No black swimwear found. She wore a green tunic, highly visible. She had it over her clothing. The time was 6:34 p.m. Later, Carly Ellsworth and her partner Steve reviewed the security footage from the Abaco Inn. Carly detailed the contents of those tapes. The timestamp was approximately 6:38. Brian and Lynette Hooker were seen leaving the hotel for the dock 4 minutes after that photo. They headed toward the boat. Brian later told police they did not leave until roughly 7:30. Wait. You and I need to keep these 3 time frames in mind simultaneously. 6:34 for the photograph, 6:38 for the surveillance camera, 7:30 according to Brian. That leaves us with a 52-minute gap. This isn't just a simple lapse in memory. This isn't your typical confusion over a few minutes here or there. We are talking about 52 minutes. It is a crucial discrepancy that doesn't just appear in this instance. It connects directly to the core of Brian's testimony regarding how he lost sight of Lynette in the water. Brian testified that the sea conditions that evening were extremely difficult. High winds, choppy waters, and a darkness that was closing in rapidly. He claimed it was so dark when Lynette fell overboard that he could not locate her. That lack of light is the pillar of his explanation for why a veteran Marine failed to find his wife. Without that darkness, his narrative demands very different answers. Jim Todd is a fire and rescue volunteer. He is a respected citizen on a small island where everyone knows everyone. He was among the first people to deal with Brian Hooker on the morning of April 5th. He assisted in the rescue of Brian off the coast of Marsh Harbor. He returned to the open sea on the rescue vessel alongside Brian and the police. He spent 10 minutes at the bow with Brian as he tried to point out exactly where Lynette fell overboard. Jim was dining with his family on the night of April 4th. He arrived at the restaurant just before 7:30. He remembers that night perfectly and described everything he observed that day with absolute precision. Between 7:30 and 7:45, the wind was picking up and it was starting to get dark. In that weather, he did not expect to see any boats. The sea was far too dangerous for any sailor. But at 6:38, according to the recordings, Jim Todd confirmed a detail that is simply indisputable to any investigator. In that specific area, and date 6:38 in the evening, was not dark. It was not twilight. It was still day. The sunlight was full and clear. There was nearly an hour of light remaining. Jim was very direct about this during his interview. On a 15-minute journey from the dock to where the Soulmate was anchored. Any incident occurring around 6:50 would have happened in broad daylight. Now let's look at Ken's testimony together, because he also knows these waters perfectly. 4 miles. That is the distance between the alleged incident at Elbow Cay and the Marsh Harbor shipyard where Brian arrived at 4. Ken explained that it is only 4 miles and it should not have taken him 10 hours to arrive. Even if he were just drifting, the arrival time should have been much shorter. Ken is neither a maritime expert nor a forensic analyst. He is a local who has spent his life at sea and knows exactly how long it takes to cover that distance in a small boat. 8 to 10 hours to cover only 4 miles. Ken described it as strange. That was his word. He was not accusing anyone. It is the conclusion of someone who knows the area, does the math, and realizes the numbers do not add up at all. Brian Hooker has publicly maintained his innocence. In his first interview, he claimed he would never hurt his wife, and that his only wish was to find her safe and sound. His attorney, Terrell Butler, categorically denies any wrongdoing. You and I will continue to analyze this case together. Let's review the facts. No criminal charges have been filed against him, and this investigation remains active. These details are documented in the official case file. We present them here with absolute rigor and no embellishment. Yet Ken didn't pick up on anything suspicious about Brian Hooker. He characterized their brief exchange at the bar as completely routine. Brian came across like a veteran, reserved, polite, and clearly appreciative of the quick service he received. Nothing raised a red flag. Not one thing seemed out of place. Ken isn't describing a man acting suspiciously, just hours before his wife went missing. He's describing a customer who ordered a rum and coke, said thanks, and walked out. The man himself wasn't the anomaly. It's the math. And those figures align with a specific detail Jim Todd documented in the official report. A detail that Ken's testimony makes even more critical. This took place on the morning of April 5th. While standing on the bow of the rescue vessel next to Brian Hooker, Jim Todd asked exactly what clothing Lynette had been wearing. That is not a question asked at random. In any search and rescue operation, a precise description of the victim's clothing becomes the primary objective for the team. That data is broadcasted via radio and text, reaching every search team currently deployed across the water. Anyone scanning the surface for floating debris focuses exclusively on the visual markers provided in that official description. Brian Hooker's answer never wavered from his talk with Jim Todd to the messages sent to the teams. She was in a black bikini. That was exactly what they were looking for. A woman in a black bikini. But the photo taken at 1834 shows Lynette wearing a green blouse. A bright green garment layered over whatever else she might have been wearing underneath. Something highly visible and buoyant. Trackable. The kind of visual lead a rescue crew instructed to look for green would have prioritized in those waters. Brian never mentioned that green blouse to a single person. Not to Jim Todd and not to the rescue teams coordinating the sea grid. It was also completely missing from the text messages sent out to organize the search for his own wife. Jim Todd admitted that this revelation fundamentally shifted his entire perspective on the case. Once he learned about the existence of the green blouse, his perception of Brian's narrative changed on a deep fundamental level. It was a total shift. A man who watches his wife fall overboard just 4 minutes after photographing her in a green blouse wouldn't forget that detail if he truly wanted her found. That green garment would have been the first thing any reasonable person mentioned in a life-or-death situation. The green blouse would be the most visible thing in the water, providing the crucial data point the rescuers desperately needed. It was never mentioned once. Not to Jim Todd, not to the teams, and not in any publicly confirmed statements to this day. Brian Hooker denies any criminal wrongdoing. His attorney has made that position clear and unequivocal. There are no charges, but the case remains active. Police confirm that Brian Hooker has not been exonerated and remains a suspect. Now let's analyze Ken together and examine what his specific testimony brings to the table. Because Ken is the one who places that night into a context that no one else can match. He was there positioned behind the bar, observing the evening as a man who analyzes everything without getting involved. A professional who serves customers while studying them, maintaining a discreet and strictly observant distance. Ken never laid eyes on Lynette Hooker directly during the 2.5 hours the couple spent at the inn. He saw Brian twice. He heard the suspect's voice on 2 distinct occasions. He processed the credit card and heard the man's thanks. What Ken testified regarding why the later events don't align isn't just a theory. This isn't mere speculation masquerading as some kind of expert forensic analysis. It's geographic knowledge applied to hard numbers. We are talking about only 4 miles in that direction. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours. Even just drifting the arrival time should have been significantly shorter. Ken knows the Sea of Abaco intimately and understands exactly how those maritime routes function. He understands the behavior of currents and winds and how vessels navigate under those exact meteorological conditions. Covering 4 miles in 8 to 10 hours simply doesn't align with Ken's professional experience with the Sea of Abaco. Even in harsh conditions, drifting without a motor, that specific timeline for navigation remains completely beyond the realm of credibility. Captain Bill, a licensed professional anchored near the Soulmate that night, confirmed on record that the local weather wasn't nearly as severe. His testimony wasn't a general assessment of the Bahamas. He focused strictly on the immediate vicinity. He was detailing the precise conditions at the exact coordinates where the Soulmate was actually anchored. We are looking at specific waters on that exact night, backed by the first-hand accounts of those who were actually there. In contrast, Brian described 3-foot swells and winds, whipping between 18 and 22 knots. He claimed the darkness was so absolute he couldn't see his wife. Still, Ken maintains 4 miles shouldn't take 10 hours. Jim Todd argues that at 6:38 p.m., 45 minutes of daylight remained. Meanwhile, Captain Bill's crew recalled the environment being calm. 3 different people. 3 conflicting perspectives on that afternoon. Independent observations that in isolation might be explained away through technicalities. But together they expose the same miscalculation. At the center sits a green tarp that rescue teams were never told existed. Now you and I need to consider a photograph taken at precisely 6:34 p.m. There is also surveillance footage recorded at exactly 6:38 p.m., followed by a 7:30 p.m. police statement. That was when Jim Todd asked Brian to pinpoint exactly where Lynette vanished. Brian couldn't provide a location, claiming the situation was too chaotic, and he wasn't certain of anything. Jim even pointed out 3 distinct landmarks on the nearby coastline to help him find his bearings. Every point was visible from the rescue boat's bow, yet Brian simply responded that he couldn't say for sure. Given the confusion, Jim later admitted that he initially suspected Brian might have been under the influence of alcohol. He fit the profile of a man suffering a trauma, someone who had been drinking, and appeared utterly exhausted and lost. In that initial moment, the assumption felt both reasonable and logical. However, Jim later learned Brian had only consumed 2 drinks over a span of 2.5 hours. Ken confirmed the bartender's own assessment. When Brian left the Abaco Inn, he was reportedly stone-cold sober. He showed no signs of impairment and appeared to be fully functional. Jim Todd was blunt in his conclusions once this new detail completely shifted his understanding of the investigation. He noted that once intoxication and panic were ruled out, the situation took on a much darker tone. When a partner falls into shallow water during daylight, a sailor's reaction should be instinctive and automatic. You drop the anchor. It is right there at your feet, a massive object impossible to overlook during an emergency. You deploy it to hold your exact position and ensure you never drift away from the person in the water. That anchor was never used. Jim also pointed to a detail regarding the second life jacket that has been largely ignored. There were 2 life jackets readily available inside the life raft. Brian claims he threw the green flotation device, yet that second life jacket remained on board completely untouched. He could have scaled it like a disc for distance or put one on and jumped in with the other. He was only 150 yards from shore and was a former United States Marine. The logical move was to swim to her, tow her to the beach, and simply walk out together. The raft could wait until morning. But none of that happened, even though Brian Hooker denies any responsibility. He told NBC he never harmed Lynette, a stance his legal counsel has officially and very clearly ratified. There are no criminal charges, but to a local expert, traveling 4 miles doesn't take 8 or 10 hours. Then there is that green tarp, which was clearly visible in a photograph taken at the scene. Captured at 6:34 p.m., it was a detail Brian never mentioned to those desperately searching for his wife. They were within 150 yards of land during what the evidence suggests was still broad daylight. That second life jacket sat at the bottom of the raft and never even touched the salt water. Ken didn't see it firsthand. He only spotted Brian twice, heard him give thanks for the service, then watched him leave. But Ken's mathematical breakdowns simply do not square with the official narrative we've been told. And Jim Todd's explanation regarding that green tarp. It just doesn't fit into our investigation. The photograph taken at 6:34 doesn't align with the official statement given to police at 7:30. When 3 basic elements that should be simple fail to resolve logically, the resulting question is not complicated at all. You and I have to ask ourselves exactly what happened out on the sea between 6:38 p.m. and 4 a.m. The investigation remains active. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Service is keeping this case wide open. Electronic devices seized from the vessel's soulmate are currently undergoing an exhaustive technical and forensic analysis. Data from an Apple Watch is being processed after a Coast Guard official confirmed its existence to Lynette's mother. The Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner confirmed that Brian Hooker remains an official suspect and that an arrest is possible. Carly Ellsworth traveled to the Bahamas personally, with one single objective: to locate her missing mother's whereabouts. She walked every inch of the coastline where cadaver dogs worked and provided an official statement to the authorities. Sitting on the dock facing the boat, she whispered that she was there, hoping her mother could somehow hear, no matter where she might be at that exact moment. 76-year-old Darlene Hamlet waits in Florida for a phone call that unfortunately has still not come. She expressed a deep desire to tell her she was loved, while Lynette always considered the ocean her sanctuary. For a decade, she documented that passion on a social media page dedicated to her sailing life with her husband. Images of sea turtles, sunsets, and the unmistakable glow of someone who had finally found exactly where they belonged. She was 55 in peak physical condition and had been an expert swimmer since she was just a child. Everything took an unexpected and dark turn during the afternoon of April 4th, 2026. The waiter served the husband his final round. 4 minutes later, a stranger photographed Lynette wearing her green tunic. Surveillance cameras at the Abaco Inn captured the couple walking toward the dock at exactly 6:34. Brian Hooker stated they set sail at 7:30. A 4-mile journey shouldn't require nearly 10 hours of navigation. Local experts know these waters well. That green tunic was never mentioned in descriptions given to the rescue teams. Let's remember that Lynette's case deserves every interrogation and step of the investigation to be handled with absolute honesty. She deserves to have the weight of every documented detail analyzed with professional rigor until a definitive conclusion is reached. We must uncover the truth about what happened in those waters on the night of April 4th, 2026. Police inquiries move forward. Forensic analysis continues. The relentless search for answers by investigators does not stop. Any relevant information regarding the disappearance of Lynette Hooker should be reported immediately to the police or Coast Guard. Both criminal investigative lines remain open as we continue to gather new evidence about what occurred on the high seas. It is vital to remember that legally, Brian Hooker has not been formally charged with any crime to date. His legal representation maintains that their client categorically and unequivocally denies any type of involvement or malpractice. The presumption of innocence is maintained for everyone involved until a court of law delivers a final and definitive verdict. Every victim deserves the truth. You and I must ensure every missing person's story is told with absolute respect.